Simmons here, go-to-market manager with Entitle. We are expecting this event today to be about 45 minutes or so. And we have a new guest making his first appearance this week. So I'm really excited about what we have to talk about today. And so that I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker of the day, Vivek Joshi. Vivek is both the CEO and founder of Entitle with decades of experience working on both sides of the industrial equation. He is passionate about all things install base and simplifying install base workflows to give customer OEM teams an opportunity to do more with less. He is also the founder of the Industry Next community designed to help industrial leaders share and learn from each other. So with that, Vivek, I will turn over to you.
JW, thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciated it. And it takes me great pleasure. Every time JW introduces me as decades of experience, and I'm usually alone in decades of experience. But today, I'm fortunate to be joined by actually a very close friend of mine, and also somebody with decades of experience, my good friend Ravi Srivastava, who joined us as Chief Business Development Officer a few months ago. And Ravi comes to us with some extraordinarily great experiences in industry, in private equity, in management consulting, and entrepreneurship as well. And so without further ado, welcome, Ravi. Thanks for joining the webinar today, and looking forward to the discussion in the next 30 minutes or so with some Q&A time. Ravi, maybe if you don't mind, a quick 30-second background. I kind of give a high-level summary, maybe a little bit background to the audience as to what you've done so far.
Sure, Vivek. Firstly, thanks for rubbing it in that, yes, it's many decades of experience now. I guess I started off at the Boston Consulting Group in strategy consulting, and subsequently have spent, 35 years now in a variety of mostly tech companies at places like Motorola and Sun Microsystems and HP, and most recently was at NetApp, which is a $6 billion data management company, where I was helping lead the install base and how we managed our install base there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ravi. And so, you and I have spent tons of years both in private equity, in industry, on both sides of the table, as I put it. And over the years, we've kind of built some interesting experiences that we can bring to the party today. In terms of how I think about this stuff, we have built an interesting company that talks about what's the art of the possible in the aftermarket. Who does it? When's the right time to do it? Where's the best time to do it? How to do it, and so on and so forth. When I think about the experience that we've had on the private equity side, I'd reckon that between the two of us, Ravi, we've talked to and worked with probably a couple of hundred firms over time, right? Large firms, small firms. By the way, for those who don't know, I did a private equity back roll-up, so I've been an operator on the private equity side, just like Ravi has. And we've done some interesting discoveries along the way, and we've done some things that make sense. And so we've been helping companies build up an aftermarket business. And I think what's interesting to me, Ravi, is that we have some findings, some learnings, if you may, that we can bring to our audience today that might be relevant to people more than aftermarket, more than a private equity-owned company. So maybe you can kind of help understand what's so unique about these companies, what's so special about them that we think we can bring to the audience today.
Sure. No, it's a really interesting question or point that you're making, Vivek, is really what is it that makes private equity-owned companies unique over here? Because in many ways, we have customers that are private equity-owned and many customers that are not and are independent businesses of their own right. The interesting thing to me also is that we didn't really go looking for private equity. Private equity, in a way, found us, right? As I know when you and I have gone through the list of customers that we have and have had over the years, is quite a significant portion of them happen to be private equity owned. So I started looking into what is it that makes it unique. And through these discussions that you referenced, I think there are several aspects. One is just focus, right? Is private equity tends to be very single-minded in their approach of what is it that they are trying to achieve, having a clear investment thesis, having a timeline in place, and a real focus on operational effectiveness, right? Is they didn't invest in companies with the intention of completely leaving them alone. They invest in companies with an intent of how do you make them even more efficient, create growth, create margin improvements, and all towards value multiplication, right? And the other aspect that I've found through these discussions and even my time in private equity is a very strong openness to switching gears, as I call it, right? It isn't a matter of, gee, we've done it this way for 20 years and damn it, we'll do it this way for the next 10. It is about how do we get results? And if it isn't working, then turn on a dime and keep moving forward.
And I think the focus on results in my mind, Ravi, is something that really sets these guys apart, right? Because they're relentlessly focused on what's going to drive value for the employees, customers, and shareholders. And I think that's the biggest thing I think we've taken away from our combined experiences in this business. When I think about where we are with aftermarket, what's going on? What are you hearing from these folks that we've been talking to the last many months?
So look, in many ways, I think even for our audience today, most people already get that aftermarket is important, right? But what is it that makes it important? And maybe putting a underline on how significant aftermarket can be is what I'll spend a couple of seconds on, right? Aftermarket business is a significant part of most industrial OEM companies, right? It's typically 20, 30, 40% of the business, generally high margins, and one that creates an ARR business essentially, which of course gives you predictability, gives you stability, and often carries businesses through downtimes as well. So hugely important from a financial perspective, from a strategic perspective, and from a customer perspective. Aftermarket also becomes the lifeblood of their continuing operations, their customer sat and customer loyalty as well, because it isn't about just sell me a product today and then go away. It's every customer wants to make sure that the company is there for the lifetime of the product, whatever that may be.
Ravi, one thing you mentioned briefly in the previous slide is, a substantial proportion of our customers are private equity-backed companies.
Mm-hmm.
You've come on board. I've brought you on board recently because of the experiences you talked about. You've had multiple conversations now over the last couple of months with both the sponsors, aka private equity funds,
mm-hmm.
as well as the companies. Is there a heightened emphasis on this in this economic cycle right now, or what are you seeing? What are you hearing from these guys?
So yes, I think there absolutely is a heightened emphasis on it. I think the first bullet point here, the CapEx trending downward, especially over the last few years, has been a significant impact on, the growth has to come with lesser investments at times, but also from the current installed base, because customer acquisition costs for new customers tends to be very high, especially in these kind of times. The other thing has just been a people-oriented aspect of things, is the individuals at companies that are focused on aftermarket often have decades of experience, speaking of that, themselves. And, they may not be in these same companies 10, 15 years down the road. And so the institutions have to think of how do we sustain this business for the long haul? So there's really a push towards not just the numbers of aftermarket from a financial perspective, but how you make that happen in terms of making it systematic and making it automated, being proactive towards it. And I think all of those are key aspects to what I'm hearing in the market.
And I think that goes back to the last point specifically, is something that we've always termed as a transition from tribal knowledge to institutionalized knowledge. And in our mind, and I think you're seeing this more and more, is data is playing a big role in this thing, right? What's the word on the street in terms of data-driven selling?
So word on the street is data-driven selling is good. The challenge is it's difficult. It's really difficult because all of this sounds good from an academic perspective, and we're both MBAs, and we're taught in school on how things matter from a data-driven perspective, et cetera, et cetera. But in the real world, the first question is, where in the world is my data, right? And is it any good? Does it really is it categorized in a way that is useful for me? I mean, look, I worked at a data management company, a very successful one. I had all the data in the world at my fingertips, and a team that was able to mull through it. But what was it actually telling me? Because I wasn't looking at it from the perspective of, gee, quantity of data and just to check the box and say, am I data driven? What one was typically looking for, and I think this is true for most leaders in industrial companies, is tell me, what do I sell, to whom, and when? And let's not get a whole lot fancier than that. And I think that's really the biggest challenge in the market is, where do people have not just access to the data, but the ability to put it into a form that's usable and to make it highly consumable by the people who need to use it on a day-to-day basis.
I'll just make a quick editorial comment. Just this morning, we had a call with a prospect who's a private equity-owned billion-dollar industrial company. Mm-hmm. And speaking of management consultants, people like you and me in our younger days, a bunch of management consultants who are helping them with the transformation. And the crux of the discussion is exactly the first 2 points. They're trying to figure out if they have all the data where they need it, and how do they collect it? How do we try and get that data actionable, and what's it going to tell them? And that's really we spend a lot of time. So this is becoming a big deal in the transformation journey for most companies as well. So when you think about this stuff, Ravi, I think what we've seen time and time again is this picture, right? So maybe any new findings out here that you've learned?
I chuckle, Vivek, because boy, have I seen this time and time again, right? As we've been talking about, clearly aftermarket is important. It needs to be data driven, but then when one pulls back the curtain, this is what one tends to see, is a lot of well-intentioned projects over the years that have created system upon system upon system, some of which are, I guess, the dark blue boxes here, nicely electronic and automated systems, and some of which, among the many lines on this slide, are manual systems along the way. Doesn't matter how good any individual system is, it's the combination that inevitably ends up in this spaghetti chart that I guess I know in the discussions I've had, I get a head nod on this one all the time, right? This is reality. Now, the question is not how did we get there? Why did we get there? It's what do we do with it now? And how do we manage it so that we can still get to data that is effective, that is meaningful to start with, and consumable? And that's really what I think a lot of the focus in the market is around. Again, it is difficult. It truly is. But there is a way to get around.
And I think that's really kind of where we come in, right? So over the last many years, we've seen the same problem again and again. In fact, even this morning's call, they asked me, Vivek, are you willing to send somebody to, I can't figure, some town in England where you have 10,000 documents that need to get scanned and digitized? They're like, no, thank you. You can do it yourself. But the fact of the matter is this is an ongoing problem in most companies, and we see that time and time again. And when I think about the entitled journey, is that is exactly the problem we set out to solve from day one, which is really how do you take all this data, make it actionable, and really we built a purpose-built solution for industrial OEMs. When I think of all the people on the call today, every one of you represents an industrial manufacturer, equipment manufacturer of some shape or form. And I think what I've noticed and what I've realized over time is, because I always tell people, by the way, I was one of few before I started entitled, just like Ravi was a NetApp, I was an industrial guy all my life. And there just simply wasn't a system that was built for my purpose of figuring out what to do with the install base, how to action it, and how to make money. So that's really what we built, is a classic web-based software as a service system. It lives and works in the cloud, is built for the cloud. And because people are mobile now, we have both the mobile handheld phone application that you see here, both in the iOS and Android forms, as well as a tablet application, right? So it becomes a all-encompassing solution, but built for purpose for the install base. And that's kind of where we are. We're fortunate that over the years that we've been around, we've got some fantastic customers who've joined us. Many of these, those of you in the audience are private equity, either practitioners or operators, will notice that many of these are private equity-owned companies. And so the lessons that Ravi talked about, the lessons that we're drawing out here, have really been built from watching some of these sponsor-owned companies do a phenomenal job on turning data into insights and action into results. And that's some of the things we've seen. So we feel very good about the fact that we got companies large and small publicly owned, privately owned companies in this mix. And when I think about what they use, what they do with this, is there's a whole plethora, there's a whole menu, if you may, of use cases that they benefit from. But if I think about where they're really focusing on, in fact, the conversation again, harken back to the conversation this morning, is Vivek, we really want to create target opportunity lists for our salespeople. We want to give them prescriptions and actions to go do. So the first highlighted bullet that you see out there, highlighted box, is creating target lists is really a big deal. People know in the aftermarket, because you've been reactive for so many years, because you've been quote unquote waiting for the phone or email to come in, many of your customers go to somebody else because they look for somebody more responsive, somebody down the street, whatever it might be. And there's a heightened awareness that retaining customers is ever more important in this CapEx constrained environment. And so people are trying to identify early on your signals for churn risk customers, finding them and going from there. And then, bread and butter, hey, who's going to buy today, right? These are the three use cases we see often. And, there's obviously a whole lot behind it that you see in this chart as well. So that's kind of what we see our customers do more often than not. And really, the question people ask us always is, okay, Vivek, this is all well and good. How do you do it? And I'd say that there's probably 2 or 3 aspects of it that are important. The first and foremost aspect, which all of you will recognize and appreciate, is you have to get the data ready. So one of Ravi's first bullet points is, where's my data? What shape and form is it? And so on and so forth, right? In that chart two, three slides ago. And one of the biggest investments Entitle has made over the last 3-4 years is this whole notion of data quality. As we say, if you want to extract more signal from noise, you better make sure you start cleaning up the data to kind of get more and more signal out there. And so we've invested huge amounts of time, energy, and dollars, if you may, in building out an amazingly robust data quality platform, which is everything for all the verbs and adjectives and adverbs you see down there. Unification, cleansing, reconciliation, deduplication, all those things are so important. Believe it or not, when you look at all the different data sources on the left-hand side, we have to do those things, because I guarantee you, your CRM will have a different identifier from your ERP, which will have something completely different in some spreadsheet. Oh my God, there are spelling mistakes and so on and so forth. So being able to make that first step is important. The second step is where the original intellectual property of the company started, which is, how do you understand how to differentiate between customers, what I would call duty cycles? How do you understand how often things get replaced? Can you tie it back to a specific serial number? How do you make it so that I can understand the propensity to buy or the loyalty ratio, if you may? And all those analytics rely on massive amounts of data science, as you call it. It's AI, machine learning at its best, both big A, big I, small I. All of that stuff is intellectual property that goes in. And finally, the thing is, as Ravi said, how do you make it consumable? Well, we do it in the form I showed you earlier, which is our own app entitled Insights, or better still, for many of you, we make this available through APIs, application programming interfaces, to your CRM or to your field service application of choice, right? So there's many ways to do it. Some of our customers have also started taking this data and insights into their cloud data lakes, be it for Power BI or whatever else you want to do. But fundamentally, we build this in a way that's a standalone system, yet as an amazing companion integratable system with all the other solutions that you have today. So that's kind of how all this has come together, Ravi, and I think that's what the private equity-backed companies are seeing with us as well.
Yeah, Vivek,
Go ahead.
I just want to jump in on one thing. If you could go back to the prior slide, please, right? Is 2 points, actually, I'd like to make. One is, I really want to stress the consumable nature of the output, right? So this idea that it isn't just smart stuff coming out of a system, because honestly, there are many systems on the market that will get you good, smart output. But how is it used? And can you feed it back into CRM systems? Can you use it? Can you have it in a form that is usable by both management and individual salespeople, by people out in the field, et cetera, and do it, in essentially real time? And that becomes hugely, hugely valuable. Otherwise, I know, there'd be times where there's output coming out of a system, but then it takes 2 weeks to get any question answered. And then you have a follow-up question. It takes 2 more weeks. And at that point, the data is pretty useless. And, everyone's just making decisions by the seat of their pants. And I think that's where Entitle works well, is that it's good information in, it's cleaned up, it's analyzed, and then fed back in a way that's highly usable. The second
Ravi,
point I do,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry,
Complete your
second
thought. I'm
point I
going to
also
ask you a
want to make
question. Yeah.
is this is when we talk about aftermarket, it's a lot more than just parts, right? There is certainly the parts replacement aspect of things, but many of industrial companies, many of our customers have already done a great job in terms of, hey, how do I get parts out, replacement parts out faster? And it's not the 1 week of years ago, but it's 2 days, 1 day, hours in many cases that you're able to get those. But you can be a lot more proactive once you have this kind of data available, and it can apply to service contracts, to warranty agreements, to consumables. There are so many areas well beyond parts that matter in the aftermarket business. Sorry, Vivek, you were asking.
Yeah, I was going to put you on the spot a little bit, Ravi, right? So you mentioned that you came recently from NetApp, where you fundamentally were focused on the install base.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, you quote unquote built it yourself. You were the DIY guys, right? What was the complication you saw in making some of this stuff work into making it actionable quickly to some of the points you said earlier, which is, you live in a morass of spreadsheets. It's hard to kind of make this a consumable solution. Can you maybe shed some light on that? Because I think that some of our audience might be in this do-it-yourself mode, right? What is your lessons learned, if you may, from your experience?
Sure. So I think it's in each of these columns, if you will, right? Yes, we had a lot of data. We even had data that came from our systems that was sent back home, what I used to call the ET phone home concept, essentially, of the data would get shipped to headquarters, and we were able to, I say access the data, but I say it with a little tongue in cheek, because how one accessed it was not straightforward, right? Mm-hmm. Is you still had to deal with the deduping aspects, with cleansing, with where is it Acme Inc., where is it Acme Inc. with a period, where is it Acme Incorporated, where is it Acme, where is it Acme USA, and it just goes on and on and on. And suddenly you would spending lots and lots of energy saying, who are we even talking about here, right? From the middle section, the challenge from a do-it-yourself part was, how do you put enough of resources on it to be able to really zero in on the analytics aspect of it and feeding in the access part? At the end of the day, it's always a battle for resources. No matter how important something is, there's never an infinite amount of resources. And I know you mentioned how Entitle is purpose-built. That really matters. I mean, I'll give you a crazy example, because recently we bought an air fryer. Now, what in the world does an air fryer have to do with installed base? Is it does only one thing, but it does it really well. I have lots of appliances in our house that can do something that kind of looks like air frying, convection ovens, all sorts of things. But getting something that does one thing and does it really well is key. And for something as important as install base, as we mentioned, 30+% of one's business with high margins, it really helps to have that purpose-built capability compared to anything that we could do in-house. And finally,
and that purpose-built capability allows you to do things quickly, right?
Correct.
Air fryer.
Absolutely. Sorry, that was not a practice piece.
Exactly. But I think the point is exactly that, right? I mean, the reason I picked on you on the NetApp experience is that I think, look, all of us grew up with this point of view that we can build it ourselves. But the question is, should we and should we not have a quote-unquote appliance built for purpose? And with an air fryer, you can do things much faster in a specialized way, press two buttons and things are done versus, whatever, right? And I think that's the value of some of this stuff with purpose-built is we're able to get through this stuff very quickly, 8 to 12 weeks. And Ravi, I again, put you on the spot. My NetApp discussion with you before you joined me was like, you took a solid amount of time to get to where you got something useful for your people, right?
That's correct. I mean, honestly, nothing was measured in weeks. It was probably 8 to 12 months for us to get things off the ground there, right? It's just in the nature of different businesses, different priorities, and that it wasn't purpose-built. I think with Entitle, what you and the team have built up over the years and what we're now continuing to see in the market is that we're able to get up and running in 2 to 3 months, which, is not just up and running that lights blink on a screen, but it's actually delivering on those targeted lists that you were referring to. It's actually delivering on capabilities that allow customers to look at churn risk and things like that on, I won't say day one, but by
Pretty
the time
quickly.
you hit week 8 to 12.
So, Ravi, we've talked a lot about the generic aspects of what an entitled solution does. What's your experience in terms of private equity and who should be involved? When should they involve? Maybe we can talk a little bit about that because, again, this might be beneficial to some of the folks on the call today.
Sure. So I'm really seeing that this is the classic "it takes a village," right? But what's interesting to me in the discussions that we've been having with private equity, both private equity firms as well as companies that are private equity owned, is that the point of entry, if you will, can come from many different places, right? So the CEOs are obviously interested in how do I make the business more efficient? How do I grow the business, et cetera? And aftermarket affords a pretty unique and solid opportunity to be able to do that. CFOs, again, are also very interested, not only for that top line growth, but the margin aspect of it. Is aftermarket almost always is higher margin than the core business. So by being able to grow that, one is able to really take advantage of the ability to impact those EBITDA numbers, both in actual absolute numbers as well as from a percentage margin perspective, right? The other aspect is just being able to make it a recurring revenue, as I mentioned earlier, the predictability of it. And once you get this aftermarket engine going, it doesn't stop on the end of your fiscal year. It just keeps going. And in fact, it grows upon itself because one can uncover cross-sell, upsell opportunities way beyond the parts replacement that I had mentioned earlier. And from a PE team perspective, again, I've found many of the PE firms now have operating partners that often will get involved in, hey, here is a tool or a technology or capability that will help enhance companies' operations. But I was also pleased to find a lot of the investment professionals are looking and saying, hey, this deal is my baby, and how do I make sure that it's successful? And by helping grow a chunk of the business, that really can help enhance the operation. So it really comes from many different angles, but almost always at the senior levels.
But I think the other point you made is both senior level and across the sponsor and the portfolio company as well, right? So there's a tight tandem in that. And I think when you start thinking about the timing, you again talked to a bunch of people recently. What are they telling you in terms of when's the right time to introduce such a thought process or solution into the life cycle of a company?
So I was thinking about this in terms of phases, and of course, with phases, I think moon. So we get a little cutesy on this slide, but it's about how do we think about when is the right time for entitle or generally thinking about growing your aftermarket business for private equity owned companies. The first phase is since it's the first phase at the beginning, right? It is when aftermarket is a core part of the investment thesis altogether. And naturally, it becomes a matter of, well, not just, okay, we're going to grow the aftermarket business, but how are we going to do that? And how do we make that happen quickly? How do we make it happen sustainably through the lifetime that the company is owned by the PE firm? The second phase is when it isn't part of the original investment thesis, but as operations get up and running, how do we make sure that we are firing on all cylinders, that we're able to say, oh, it's nice that we have grown operations by shedding a less profitable business, by opening up in new markets, by expanding a new product line. But then there's this thing called aftermarket. It keeps chugging along. What more can we be doing there? And honestly, a lot of our customers today come from that phase two because they're looking at it saying, I need to help grow my business. What can I do? But the interesting part I've also heard a lot about is this phase three, which is as PE firms are getting to the tail end of their investment timeline, they're looking at aftermarket and saying, can I demonstrate a new beachhead for growth so that whoever they may be selling this company to down the road has not just hand waving, but actual processes and numbers to show that, hey, there is even more growth potential in the aftermarket. And all of these, of course, lead to higher valuations, which, makes everyone happy.
Yeah, the last part is actually an interesting one that I've seen recently with a couple of our customers as well. So it's good to hear that as well from you. So as we wrap up, Ravi, what are the big takeaways for folks on the call today?
Look, I think we've said it over the last half hour or so, Vivek, right? Is aftermarket matters. It really does. Strategically, financially, customers experience-wise, in every way possible. But beyond the hand-wringing, it is difficult. It is actually a difficult beast to grow, but it is possible. It starts with data, starts with intelligent application of technology, of analytics to that data. And equally importantly, as we have stressed today, is making it consumable to the right people at the right time. There is a way to do it. And that's why I'm happy to be on board at Entitle, is we've really found a way that is effective, fast, easy, and proven. It's effective because the ROI is in months, not years.
Yep.
Right? Is that 8 to 12 weeks that you referenced is to get going, even including that 8 to 12 week mark. I'm not cheating and starting the clock at the end of that. I'm starting the clock at the beginning. At the same time, by that month 3 to 6 part, our customers, I think in every case, are seeing results that they can point to and say, hey, this is incremental revenue that I wouldn't have gotten if I wasn't using Entitle. And the numbers are such that the ROI is you're getting your money back in well within 6 months to 12 months at the very most. And then you see the continuing stream beyond that.
Yep.
Well, that's the fast. So I guess I've spoken to that as well. As it happens. The easy I will touch on for a second is it isn't actually easy. I think we make it easy. Our team is able to do a lot of that heavy lifting and makes it easy for our customers. And proven, well, you showed a list of logos of some of our customers. I mean, some of those are very large companies, which is, of course, a sense that there's something here that works. I thought it was interesting that you have that we have companies on there, 5 of them have the same parent, for instance. That doesn't happen by accident. Obviously, something's working. And most importantly, I keep hearing from our customers of how they're expanding operations with us. And that to me is the biggest proven, is not just that they're happy, but they're expanding operations with us. So I think
Proof is in the pudding. Yep. Perfect. Well, good. Thank you. That was a really good discussion, Ravi. JW, I think we're now open for questions. We have a few minutes. We went over a couple of minutes, but that's not too bad. We have time for like a few questions, JW. So I'll turn it over to you and let you moderate the questions.
Sure. Yeah, I got a couple in here, and thank you again, Ravi and Vivek, for that awesome presentation. That was great. So first question is around data. Wondering, how is data handled? How do you really solve the data quality issues we've tried for years with no success?
So I can tell you that, as Ravi said a couple of minutes ago, it's not easy, but it takes extraordinary amounts of focus in terms of the intellectual property built around data quality, intellectual property built around manufacturing data models, and so on and so forth. So as I mentioned earlier in one of the slides in the middle of the presentation, data quality is important in terms of understanding the provenance of the data, which is where it came from, the type of system that came from, the vintage of the data, and then applying a series of technologies to make sure that we use all those adverbs and adjectives, if you may, to make the data better. And I think the ability to get that data prepared, as we call it, is a simple word, but it's a very complex enterprise there, is a mix of automation and technology that we've built, a bunch of what I would call intellectual property know-how that we've gathered over, we're working with 40, 50 different systems, believe it or not, that we've worked with over time, and just the ability to kind of get things done in a streamlined, purposeful manner. So the collection of all those things really have helped us make the data quality problem not go away, but reduce the intensity of the problem much more than most companies would do. And I think that's kind of how we've handled it, JW.
Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. And one more around that data topic. How does Entitle handle data quality and data security concerns? Is this in the cloud?
That's a very common question we get asked, which is, the data security, data quality. So I'd say there's two different aspects to it that I would answer. First and foremost, most public clouds these days, like Amazon and Azure and stuff, they're fundamentally is solid security built in from the penetration other aspect. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it's there. Secondly, our data models make sure that we don't intermingle any data. So your data is yours, it's yours, and it stays in your own container, if you may. So that's protected that way. Third, we have strong certifications, as we call it. SOC 2 is a very common certification, which means we've gone through a series of processes to make sure data is secure in transit, it's secure at rest. We know the practices of how we handle data and so on and so forth. And finally, what we do on a routine basis, probably 2, 3 times a year, is we do what we call penetration tests, which is we go through and make sure we beat up our own system to make sure there's no vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. And we provide that information to our customers all the time. And in fact, I would argue that you should ask for that when we start the process. And then lastly, by the way, what last thing I would say is now, because of European GDPR and other privacy things, we are GDPR compliant in terms of how we handle data, how we do it, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of where we are managing this whole process today. So hopefully that responds to the question as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. And we did just get a couple more in as well. First one's probably a pretty quick answer, Vivek, you can probably take. What would be the minimum size of the business in revenue to justify the investment?
The way I've always thought about this size of question to justify investment is to go back to Ravi's point about ROI and payback in months. Most of our customers see 8 to 10x ROI within the first year, which is to say that if you spend $50,000 in it, can you get $500,000 out of it, roughly, just to make easy math work, right? And I think that's the way I would think about it, right? If the incremental upside to you is $500,000, $1 million and over, you should definitely invest in this technology because the returns are very quick from that point of view. Having said that, most of our customers are $70, $80 million minimum, all the way up to multi-billion dollars. You saw the logo sheet. Some of them are $20 billion customers who've deployed us not just in a particular product line or geography, but now are expanding globally. But I'd say you probably need to be at least in the $50, $70 million range before you start going up for two reasons. One is you have sufficient install base value, if you may, if your asset lasts for 15, 20 years, which is typically you at least have $1 billion of value out there that can be quote unquote monetized, and 4 or 5% a year is very normal, higher for certain kinds of products. So you could conceivably look at 50, 60, $70 million aftermarket available market. That has to be meaningful to you. That's point number one. Point number two, and this I'd say that not lightly, is candidly, smaller businesses do not have the people resources, if you may, human capital, who can do something with this, right? Most $50, $60 million businesses are kind of lean. And the ability to make sense of it and to make money with it, to resource the sales and so on and so forth, it takes some work and you have to be prepared to do that. And I think that's where we see the issue is the ability to get things done, right? So that's the way I'd answer it. I don't know, Ravi, if you have anything to add to that size of company question.
I think you've nailed it, Vivek. Is that's about where I was thinking even before you said the numbers. Is you have to be of roughly that size to be able to take advantage of this. Now there are always exceptions to the rule depending on what percentage one's business is that is aftermarket, what room for growth you've got, et cetera. But I think that's about right.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, another question or two?
Yeah, we have one more for you, I think, Vivek. So the challenge we're facing is we do sell the original equipment to EPC, but the aftermarket business we're receiving from end users, distributors, and O&M companies. How can Entitle map the spares to the equipment? I know it's a big question.
It's a big question, not a simple answer. And all I can say to you is maybe the answer I'm going to give is not entirely satisfactory, but it's practical, which is to say, you're not going to be able to conquer this data problem right on day one. You're going to have to start prioritizing what you can get done and how and move on from there. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If you're an EPC company, invariably, not always, invariably, they can have two different ways to do it. They will always tell you it is for this particular project, for example, right? I'm EPC Bechtel, and I'm going to put it in, the Exxon Mobil complex in Shreveport. I'm just making up stuff. Invariably, they'll tell you which project is destined for, or they could have a ship to directly on that one. So that's one way to do it. Second thing is you will find that when coming back to the ship tos, very often, whether it's a distribution, otherwise, ship tos is a very common field that people ignore. And when you start looking at all the data sources, we tend to look at that a lot. So that's point number one. Point number two, depending on the complexity of the machine or equipment you make, you should have decent bills of materials, which are unique to that particular model type and maybe even serial number. So going back to the second half of the question, we're getting aftermarket orders from end users or O&M companies. If you know they're ordering a part number ABCD, it's not easy, but you can go back and look up where that part was used and which particular products were used in, and there's a way to triangulate that information. The third thing I would say to you is that what we've seen is that, again, and this is the hard part of it, as you start looking at this information, as you start looking at this data, realizing that, oh, you know what? Joe Smith in the other department actually had a list of all these people that we talked to many years ago. Let's go get Joe Smith's list. Or we'll find a distribution list where somebody's got something available. So it's a matter of putting all these things together and triangulating it. But I can guarantee you're not going to get 100% coverage on day one. In fact, we've done things with some of our customers on the logo sheet that you saw. We'll start maybe getting up to 40, 50% coverage, and the following is 60% coverage, and so on and so forth. But the 100% is really hard to get to. So that's, I would say, have reasonable expectations and build up from there. So that's my answer to that. Ravi, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or that's...
Again, I think the line I've used at times is we're very good at what we do, but we're not magicians, right? As if the data is not there, then we can't make it appear out of thin air. However, to all of the points that you said, there are ways to triangulate on it. That's certainly a key word. The other that I've had a conversation just last week with a prospect where they're saying, hey, we have started to capture certain pieces of data just in the last 2 years, but I don't have it for my installed base all throughout. What can we do with that? So we can start with what exists now. We can use that as a way to extrapolate for prior years' data. And then as the years move forward, we're able to have a richer set of data that one can really get those insights from as well. So it's a combination. It just depends on the specific situation. That is what happens in that 8 to 12 week period. We work with you on all that.
And I'll reinforce my decades of experience, and I'll say two things, right? One is, with due respect to PETA and SPCA, the favorite phrase that I keep in my mind, you eat an elephant one small bite at a time. So you just have to be pragmatic about how you're going to go after this entirety of the problem that you've been dealing with for decades. That's point number one. Point number two, I'll say something to what Ravi said towards the end, which is, look, I've been around since the early 90s in the industrial world, and candidly, we didn't care about this data. We just ignored it. It was there. It's some IT guy's problem. We just said, yeah, it's their problem. We didn't care about it. But now you suddenly wake up in 2023 and saying, holy crap, we don't have any of the data. We didn't pay attention to all this stuff. We didn't pay attention to data quality. Oh my God, we didn't take care of finding which particular part that went to, which machine that part went into. You know what we find when we look at service notes? The most favorite serial numbers tend to be either 99999 or 00000, because nobody's ever taking the time, even today, to track which machine they put the part in, right? So the fundamental practices have to change, mindset have to change for this to get addressed. But again, there's a way to solve it. Just don't expect perfection and don't expect magic, even year one, year two, right? It's a process. I know, JW, we're pretty much out of time. Is there one more question, or should we kind of wrap it up for the night, for the evening?
No, that's all from us from here. So yeah, I think we're good to wrap up.
Excellent. Well, I've put Ravi's and our email addresses out here. Feel free to write to either of us, or write to info@entitle.com. We're more than excited to kind of answer any questions you may have. And, I think we can go from there. But there's more stuff to share. We'll obviously share information with the folks on this call later on after the meeting today. Thank you very much, everybody. Good evening, good night, and thanks for participating today. Appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.